Okay, sorry for the delay, everyone. We'll get faster at this, I promise.
But you can't come back up.
How is everyone doing tonight? I want to make sure I can hear you guys.
Doing good. How are you?
Doing
Good, thanks.
Good.
Glad you tested negative, Max.
It was my mom had it on Thursday and then gave it to my niece, and then my dad had it on Monday, and then my brother and sister-in-law tested positive today. So it was like this whole spiraling, and somehow I left right before all of that happened, and I somehow tested negative, which is
Wow.
I can't believe it. It is so transmissible, and that's why I'm like, yeah, it's great to be in person, but there's something to be said about having the remote option too.
I know up at that desk in the front, sometimes they have like random.
Okay, so who wants to kick us off for stand-up? What did we learn yesterday?
Using data to populate our app.
Yep. What did was there any light bulb moments yesterday? Was there anything that connected? Was there anything that we saw in free code camp and then, finally understood when we started doing the select? How are we feeling in general?
For me, a light bulb moment was when you did the thing with it where we had the starting value that we didn't have to wait for a change event to get the value of the select.
Yes. Yep. JavaScript is really flexible because it's not only just event driven, but it can also be on the page load, right? So we can start connecting that in. You all right, Chrissy?
I can't turn the volume off. How do I turn the volume off so that?
Should just be that. Nope. Function and that. There you go.
Wash my hands.
Okay, sorry about that. What else from yesterday? How are we feeling about JavaScript in general? Are we feeling like we're getting the concepts? Are we feeling like we got one more project to go and then we get into API work? How are we feeling in general?
I feel like I felt in the beginning.
Okay, meaning?
I don't feel completely lost.
Okay, well, not feeling lost is a good sign of progress, right?
I feel hopeful.
Good, hope is good. I'm probably gonna beat that hope out of you tonight with Tic Tace Toe.
I think you are.
But,
One monitor.
so we are diving into Tic Tace Toe tonight. That is definitely going to be a 3-night project. And it is going to be the most important for you to slow me down and say, hold on, let me catch up to that, right? Because we're gonna write a 350-line code program, and we are not only writing the user interface for Tic Tace Toe in HTML, we are writing our JavaScript event handlers to make the right thing happen in the buttons. We're using our nested array data structures to keep track of what the board is and how we're playing. And then we are writing our update HTML method to take all of the data from the JavaScript and make it show up in the buttons. And then we have to write a method that's going to check to see if someone has won the game. And then we have to create essentially what is the starting point for an artificial intelligence, which is an algorithm. And we need to write an algorithm to have the computer play after the user plays. So that's where we are headed. Anyone have questions on that?
So Max, remember in the beginning when I was saying, oh, I can't wait. I hope I fall in love with JavaScript, right?
Yep.
I definitely think that I love HTML.
I was not prepared.
I feel like you should have said yes, Scotty. I don't know how you're gonna feel about that. But wait till you see. You should have gave me some type of like heads up a little bit.
So the good news is next week you are going to get exposed to APIs, which Ryan is teaching. And that is going to be all about interacting with data, pulling in other data sources from the internet, understanding how the internet works at a basic conceptual level. That's really cool because that's when your programs start talking to other servers and other apps and other data sources and all of that stuff. And then the good news is we have one more project week, so we have a little bit of a breather to catch up on anything that is JavaScript related. And that project week, we can set aside an entire day for homework assignments of like, here's where I'm at, here's what I added, here's where I'm stuck on this assignment. Can we just go back and have like a catch-up day? So we're going to do that for one of the days in the project weeks. And then we head into React. And React is really a mashup between HTML and JavaScript. It is using all of our JavaScript syntax and all of our HTML syntax and putting it together all in one file. And that syntax is called JSX. So the good news is if you liked HTML and hated JavaScript, we're going back to HTML. And if you loved JavaScript and hated HTML, well, now you've got a chance to mesh those two together. So that's what's coming up. And then we move into kind of the back end and databases and servers and making our own APIs. Anyone else have an opinion between JavaScript and HTML? Does anyone like JavaScript more than HTML? Okay,
No.
that's good.
No.
A lot of learning, but I like it's more interesting.
Okay. Anyone a CSS fan?
I like CSS too.
I like CSS.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of CSS.
Okay, all right.
And I like the JavaScript too. But I spend pointless hours modifying CSS.
It is definitely a rabbit hole that is easy to fall down.
Just wait till you gotta get to React.
React is going to be an interesting experience for everyone. It's interesting because I write all of my code in React, and I don't use vanilla JavaScript at all. And so there are things that we are writing now which are important for you to understand the syntax and learn the concepts of the DOM and all of that stuff. But we will get to the point with React where you're like, huh, that does make it a lot easier. I wonder why we didn't do that from the beginning. So, we ready to dive in today? Do we have any last minute questions from the weather app from yesterday? Because we will not be revisiting that today, except for the next couple minutes if anyone has questions. Got stuck anywhere, or doesn't know why we did it, anything like that.
The one-on-one.
Okay. One-on-one's always available. Calendly should be up to date. And I should have mornings available both this Saturday and Sunday. So if weekends are better for you guys, you should be able to schedule. Okay, so we are going to jump in. Give me 1 second to get Windows situated here. Pull that up. Let me pull up the outline for today. I did create the homework assignment for yesterday, and all videos are up to date on YouTube now and on the schedule, plus an outline for yesterday, which I was missing. What I do think I forgot to do was link the outlines in Canvas. So let me do that really quickly. I'm going to just drop today's outline in the Zoom chat and into Slack because I did not put it on Canvas. That's going there. That's going to go into Slack on the live stream. Just a note, next week, no matter what we decide for in-person versus virtual, next week will be fully virtual. I'm not sure if Ryan still lives in Syracuse or not, but he will not be here next week. So next week will be fully virtual, and you have a week off from me next week. Not in general, but I believe he does. I don't know if he's. I don't know. but Ryan's an awesome teacher. He has taught for all 3 cohorts of careers in code. And so excited to have him teach you guys all about APIs. Okay, so we are going to get started by sharing our screen. And I need to move you guys over here. And VS Code. Okay, I'm gonna file open folder. We're gonna do the setup that you guys are probably getting sick of now at this point. Week 9, we're gonna do day 2. I'm gonna open that. I'm gonna create a new file called index.html. From there, I am going to do a new one called script.js. And we actually do not need style.css for this project. We're going to keep this as lightweight as possible, although I do encourage you guys to go back in and style it after we are fully done with it. This is going to be a 3-day project, so don't panic if you see anything on the outline that we don't get to. This is all going to roll over until the next day. And what I would like you guys to do for homework, because this will be like the big weekend project to turn in for homework. So your homework every night is to review the code that we did that night or the previous day and come in with questions, right? Because this is such a big project that you're going to need time to digest it, to reopen it, to read through it and be like, all right, I stayed up and it's all working, but I still don't understand this line. So during stand-up for the next 2 days, we're going to open it up with questions, right? And that's how we're going to start class before we continue to add in additional features. Okay, so in my VS Code, I'm going to add my standard HTML template. I'm going to do my exclamation point enter tab and complete that. In my document, I will say tic tac toe for the title tag. And then down in the body, I'm going to do a script tag with my src pointing to script.js. And I'm going to save that and go to my script.js. And from there, I am going to just do a console.log test. And I'm going to go to my index.html and boot up my live server and right click and go into inspect and make sure that I see my console log test logging out. And a reminder, even though this is in red, you don't need to worry about the favicon. That's just the browser looking for something that VS Code isn't serving up, and that's okay. And so let me start my live share, and I will also dump that into Slack.
That was the old live share? Yeah, that was an old live share. I wonder why. Okay.
Yes, today's live share just got posted. So we should be at the point where we've got tests showing up in the console, and we've got our HTML document and our script.js with the console log test. So just give everyone a minute to catch up there, and then we will move on. You have a question? Okay.
Well, I do have a question for Zach about this pizza. But yeah, because the smell is so strong. It's for all of us.
It's gonna be ready at like 38.
Oh, but it's for all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Because like now you got my stomach. I hit
Thank you so much, Zach.
how to stop it, so I'm gonna watch.
It should, once it finishes downloading, it will have a little pop-up in the top right that says like, do you want to restart now? And if you hit like try tonight or restart later, it won't reboot on you. So you should be fine to code along if you want.
And I almost feel like I should watch. And
That's fine.
then, but while I'm waiting, look.
Go for it.
Why would you bring this pizza in here?
Hello, welcome.
Zach, really?
Let me end my class. Hold on.
You want to make me the hungry one. Hello, Chantel, how you doing? Great.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do to get started here is we got our script.js loaded up. We've got our test in the console. Now we need to build out our basic interface, right? So tic-tac-toe, when we think about it, it's just a 3x3 grid, right? So what we're going to do to get that working is we're going to go in our body. We're going to do a div class row. And in that row, we're going to put 3 buttons. So we're just going to do a button and we're going to say ampersand NBSP with a semicolon at the end of that. And what that stands for is non-breaking space. Basically, HTML does not like it when you just have a space in the button. It doesn't like just the space character. So what we do is we do this special encoding to basically say, hey, the only thing in this button should be an actual space character. So we're going to take that and copy that 3 times. And then we're going to take our row, take that whole div and copy that 2 more times. So when we save that and come back over to the browser, we should have our 3x3 grid of our buttons. So once we have that working, what is the next logical step? What do we want to happen in the browser to get our tic-tac-toe game going?
One needs to be able to pick.
Exactly. So when someone clicks on one of these buttons, we would like it to do something in the JavaScript, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our JavaScript and we are going to say, hey, well, I'm sorry, we're going to say in our HTML, and we're going to say when someone clicks on a button, what we would like to do is say the button was clicked. And that is going to bring in the event of what got clicked on. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go into my JavaScript and I'm going to say const button clicked equals a new function, which is bringing the event in. And all I want to do is console log out the event. So when I come back to my browser and I click on this first button, I see this pointer event pop up. But if I click on any of the other buttons, nothing happens. That is because I only put my on click on this first button. So I'm going to take this on click and just paste it on all of my other buttons so that when I click on any of the buttons, my button clicked function runs. So I go back over to my script.js, I click on any button and I get pointer event. Okay, so what should happen when I click on one of those buttons? It's a game of tic-tac-toe. Once I pick
Option to do either X or are you typing, are we going to type, the person going to type in their X or?
Nope. So what we're going to do is the person playing is always going to be X and the computer is always going to be O. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so when a user clicks on any one of these buttons, an X is going to show up in that button. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to our JavaScript and how do we make that happen?
You got to determine whose turn it is.
Well, we're going to say the player always starts first. It's an event. Once we click on the button, what would it be helpful to know?
What's available?
What button got clicked on, right? In order to make the X show up in the button, we have to know what button it was clicked on. So we know we've got event.target, But the problem is if we log out the event.target, all we're going to get is the button that got clicked on, but that's not really enough. We need to know, hey, what button was that actually? Was that the button in the top row in the center? Was that the middle button? What button was it? So what we're going to do is we're going back to our index.html, and what we're going to do is we're going to add an ID onto each one of these buttons. And we're going to say ID is button 1, ID is button 2. And what you may ask is, hey, Max, why aren't you just calling it ID equals 1? Well, CSS is weird and does not allow for numbers to be at the start of an ID. And so we have to use a letter at the beginning of it to follow CSS rules and not start an ID with a number.
That's all CSS. Everything, no numbers.
No numbers starting the beginning of a selector. Okay, so we've got all of that going. Now, when I go back to my script.js, instead of just logging out the event target, I want to log out the event target ID. So when I save that, go back to our browser and click on a button, I have B2 pop out. And if I click on another button, I get B9 popping out. Okay, well, that's great, but we need to keep track of the board, right? We need to basically say, where are the X's and where are the O's? But when we think of this board, what do we see? It's basically a grid. So what data structure are we going to use in JavaScript to represent this grid?
Array.
An array, what kind of an array? It's going to be a special kind of array.
Nested?
It's going to be a nested array. You got it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with our board. And our board is going to have, the entire board is one big array. But in that array, we're going to have independent nested arrays in there. And so the board needs to know, hey, how's it starting out? And we're going to put in our 3 empty strings. And the reason we're doing our empty strings there is if it's empty, that means no one has played that space yet. But if it isn't emptied, if it's going to have either an X or an O in it, and that means someone has played it. So what we need to do is we need our board here to reflect our HTML. So we're going to create another function called update HTML. And what that's going to do is it's going to loop over every row in the board. And while we're looping over every row, we also need to loop over each individual column to get that. So we go to our board. Our board is looping over and giving us each of these nested arrays. And once we get the nested array in the row here, we break it down into the columns and get each one of these empty strings. So what we're going to do is we're going to say in our update HTML, we've got to start a placeholder. We've got to say, hey, the HTML is going to start out as this thing. And that whole thing is going to be a div with an ID equal to board. And then every time we hit a row, wait a second, we've already got this HTML written. We can actually take this entire div class row that we already have and stick it in here to say HTML add on a row for us. And then once we're done looping over all of the columns, go ahead and close out that div for us. So what we're doing is we're getting our div started. We are then going in and creating a div for our row. And then we've got to loop over all the columns, which we'll do in a second. And then we're closing off this div for the row. And we also need to close off this div for the board. And the last thing we have to do is take this button on click and add in our HTML plus equals our button on click. So we're going to take all of this lovely HTML that we finally updated and say all of that, we're going to document get element by ID, go grab the board, and in the inner HTML, update that to our HTML. So when we call our update HTML function at the bottom of the page, it should generate out the board for me. So when I come over here, I get cannot set properties of null setting inner HTML. Okay, well, we look at inner HTML and we think the problem's with inner HTML, right? So we go to line 18 and we say, well, what's wrong with inner HTML? Nothing is wrong with it. The problem is it is trying to set inner HTML to something of null. Okay, well, why is get element by ID board null? That's because in our index.html, we've got all of our rows going on, but we didn't put them all in a div with an ID of board. I'm going to stop after this, but what we should have going on is now in our update HTML, it's updating all of our buttons for us. And we know that because in this button, instead of putting a non-breaking space, we can put in whatever the value of the column is. So if we go up into our board and just start typing in some random X's and some O's and save it, what we should have going on here is our X's and O's showing up. Now that's ugly and we're going to fix that. But let's do a quick run through of the code, and then I'm going to start a poll and make sure everyone's caught up. So up at the top, we've got our board. Our board is a multi-dimensional or nested array. And what that means is there is an array inside of the array, right? So it is basically a list of data inside another list of data. Our board is broken out into rows. And our row has 3 columns in it, right? For the 3 tic-tac-toe spots. If it is an empty string, that means it's empty. That means someone can play it. But if it is not an empty string, it should have an X or an O in it, meaning someone has just played that turn. Then we come down and we say, hey, we've got this data here, but we need to bridge the gap between the HTML and the CSS. Based off of our board in our JavaScript up here, we need to build out and generate this HTML to reflect what is in our board. So we start out by saying, let HTML start out with a div ID of board. Then we come in and we say, hey, go over each row from the board. And so what's happening is every time we go through this for loop, we're getting this array. And then we get this array, and then we get this array. So from here, we say, hey, every time you hit a new row, create a new div class row. And again, all of this is getting modeled off of the HTML we had already written in our regular HTML file. So we're going to say, hey, every time you hit a new column in the row, again, each one of these columns is going to be a string coming in from up here. Every time we find a new column, add that to the HTML, and the HTML we want to add is the button with the on click and then the column value in it. So it's either going to be an empty string, or it's going to be an X, or it's going to be an O. And then after we have gone through all of the columns in the row, go ahead and go to the index HTML and add in the closing div. That closing div is matching this div up here. So these curly braces matter because it is outside of this curly brace, that means this code is going to run for each row, but it is not going to run for each column. If we tilt this HTML and put it up in this for loop, it would be for each column. So we then get down here, and now because we're outside of this curly brace, it's saying now that we're done generating all of the rows, add in one final closing div. What's that final closing div for? That's for the div ID board. All right, we survived generating out the whole board. Now down here, we're going to do document get element by ID board, which means it's going to go to our index.html, pull out this div ID board, and we are going to take all of the HTML we generated and shove that into the inner HTML. And so what happens now is if I console log out my HTML, it's not going to be pretty, but it's showing you everything that's getting generated. It's taking all of those buttons, putting it all into HTML for us, and basing it off of our board. So if everything is working, we can go to our board and place any letter in here. And when we hit save and come back into VS Code, our board should reflect what has the X's and the O's in it. Now that was a lot. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to leave this code up and I'm going to kick off a poll. And I'm fine if you guys are just going along for the ride, but make sure that if you are, ask questions about why are we doing this, or why is the syntax this way, or, you know, what's this line of code doing, or whatever it may be.
Update, so update HTML. This is our first time using it, right?
So this is a function. We are making our own function. So you may have seen in Free Code Camp, the way they do functions is they say function my func, and then they've got like some parameters here, and they do like a console log.
Right.
And then down here, they just call my func, and they add in like the word, and that's how they do it. We're doing that, but using the newer arrow syntax. So this and this are going to accomplish the same thing. The only difference is we're going to put our function name here. And then in here, we're going to put our parameters. So this is where param1 would go. I can type. And then all of our code that's going to execute is going in the curly braces, just like our code goes in the curly braces up here.
And the reason why we're doing that is because we are going to be clicking on a button and expecting it to either be a X or O.
Correct. What we're doing here, the general overall flow of our program, and I'm glad you asked about that. What we're doing is we've got our const button clicked, and we know that's going to be our event. What the goal here is anytime that we do anything on the board, we're going to update the data in our array, and then the array is going to be used in update HTML, and we're going to take whatever data is in the array and reflect it into our HTML. So the general flow here is button gets clicked. Based off of what button gets clicked, it's going to update our board up here. Once our board is up to date and reflecting of what it should, then we're going to call update HTML, and that's going to take all of the board data and convert it into HTML and shove that into the browser.
We're hard coding those O's and X's.
For right now, yes. You only need just one or two of them just to make sure that they're showing up in your browser. And then next we will work on getting our buttons to look right, and then we'll get it so that when we click on it, it reflects in the board. Got 7 votes in. I think 10 is the magic number, so I'm going to wait a couple more minutes for that.
They may know it's hot and fresh. You can smell it. Oh, yeah, garlic knots. They got garlic knots too.
That cheese. What should our code be doing right now if we got everything right, Max?
It should, if you look on the TV,
Yeah.
it should have the buttons reflecting what our board data looks like in the array.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I probably have to watch the video tomorrow and do it all.
All right, and the poll, and,
But then why?
okay, you've got cannot set properties null setting inner HTML. So go to your line 20, Zach, and you're doing your document get element by ID inner HTML. All of that is fine. We need to check in our index.html and make sure we actually have a div ID board. So if you go to index.html and you've got your 3 rows, but what I did on my code was I put the whole div in the whole 3 rows in a div ID board.
Set properties, no.
Yep, you got it.
So I learned something that I didn't know,
Mhm.
which is I did this for a project that I started,
Mhm.
but I didn't do all of this. So now I can go back
Mhm.
and do that because I made well, I used images instead of just buttons.
Mhm.
Could we put an image in that?
Mhm. Yep, you put an image right in here.
Oh, okay.
Board on there.
Or in this whole place.
Put a div on the board.
Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question about your update HTML function.
Yep.
You start out with div ID equals board, and I get how it makes the whole thing, but then at the end, you're putting that into an element with the name board, with the ID board.
Correct.
So we're putting a div ID board, okay, inside of another element with an ID of board.
Yeah, you know, I wonder if that's not right. You called me out on my problem of where you're putting boards inside of board, which isn't really a problem, but every time that we call update HTML, what we're going to do is we're going to end up having boards that get put in boards that get put in other boards, and that's going to cause issues. So why don't we do, although if I call it several times, let's see if I keep on getting nested. Body, div, board. No, I never go 2 levels deep. So it may be better, instead of putting it into the element ID board, maybe call that a container instead. So instead of my div ID board, I'm going to call this container here. And then in my script.js, I'm going to say container. And that's going to be a little bit more accurate because now we're going to have our body. Our body is going to have the container. The container has the board itself, and then the board is going to have the rows. Those rows are going to have the buttons.
Got it. Thank you.
No, that's a good suggestion. You should never have 2 IDs of the same thing. And the way that we had that set up was that we would have 2 div ID boards, and that would cause problems down the road. Okay.
Max, is this supposed to look as ugly as it's appearing?
It is supposed to look as ugly as. Right. It is supposed to look as ugly as this.
Max, mine doesn't look like that, and I'm trying to figure out why.
Okay, let me blow this up, and then you can share your screen.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
You want to share your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So that's what mine looks like. And like I tried to double check the code and everything, and it all looks like the same, but I don't know what in the world I'm missing. Like my X and O is not showing up.
Okay, so go to your script.js.
Excuse me. Okay.
You got your, first of all, you're missing an opening arrow on line 8 for your first div.
Online. Oh, right there. Okay.
Save that and see if that's your problem. I don't.
No, it doesn't look like it.
Okay, so you've got your div ID board, you've got your const row of board, you've got your HTML, which you're updating. You've got a class row on that, and then button on click, button event, call, your two closing, your HTML. No, that's a good question. Pop open your console and see if we have any errors going on.
Okay. I forgot how to do that.
Just right click and go to inspect,
Oh, yeah.
and then go to the console tab.
Oh,
Aha. Cannot set properties of null setting inner HTML on line 21. So what that's doing is it's saying the problem isn't with inner HTML, it's with our board, get element by ID board. So let's go back to our index.html and make sure that we've got a div ID in there called board. And we do not have a div ID in there called board, but we do have a div of something called board.
oh, that should not be a class. It should be an ID.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
That one. Okay.
And if you want to follow along, instead of calling it board in my HTML, I called it container. But it's up to you. It won't cause major problems if you want to call it board.
Okay. Oh God, is that what's supposed to look like?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes you make it worse before you make it better.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions before we move on? The live share? It is in Slack in the live stream channel. Oh. Perfect. Thanks for the update. Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we've got our X's and O's. I'm going to clear those out because I want to start with an empty board, right? So I'm going to delete all those out. I'm going to save. I'm going to make sure my board is empty here. And now we've got these tiny little buttons. Well, I don't. Share your screen, please. I don't want these tiny little buttons to show up. I want them to have a space in it, because if it has a space in it, it's going to take out the right spacing, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, look in the col here. And if the col is has the value, go ahead and use it. Or if it doesn't have the value, use the non-breaking space. And we have to put those in quotes because we want that those actual letters to show up in the HTML. So this is an inline or statement. And it's basically saying, hey, either use the value of the column, at which point I don't have it in quotes because I want it to pull the value from up here. But if that doesn't exist, put in a non-breaking space character. So when we come over to here, now we've got our board back because there's a space inside of the buttons. But now we need to make it so that when we click on the button, the X shows up in there. So we come back over to our button click and we're console logging out our event target ID. So if we come over here and look in our console, I'm going to just comment out or delete out our console log index.html. Yep. Right here, instead of just the call in there, I added the or, which is the double bar underneath it's shift and then the key underneath delete. And then I said, if the column has a value, go ahead and put that in. Or if it doesn't, put in this non-breaking space character. Okay, so from here, I want to console log out my event target ID, right? The whole point of this ID was to figure out what button is getting clicked on. So I come over here and I click on my first button and I get B1 and I'm good to go. And I come in here and I click on what should be button 9 and I get button 1. I click on another one and I still get button 1. Okay, well, where's that button 1 coming from? In our index.html, it was coming from our IDs in here. But we're overwriting all of this stuff that's in here and using our update HTML function, which is generating out our buttons for us. Okay, all of that's fine, but we've got B1 here and that's hard coded. So what we need to do is we're going to come up here and we're going to say, let button number start at 1. And every time that we find a button, instead of putting in B1, use our template literal, use that $ curly braces syntax. And what that's doing to the JavaScript is it's saying, hey, all of this is a string. But as soon as you see these $ curly braces, go figure out what is inside of the curly braces and replace that whole thing with the value that we want. So we're going to put in there our button num. And then once we're done generating out the HTML for that button, we are going to add 1 to the button num. So this button num ++ is going to be the same thing as saying button num equals button num +1. This ++ syntax is just a shorthand for this line of code. So now when I save and come back over and click, I get button 9, button 1, button 5. And again, what we did is we said, let button num start out at 1. When we're going through and actually making the HTML button, use this template literal syntax. And we can't use those $ curly braces unless our opening quote there is a backtick. And so now that it's a backtick, we've got our ID in here. We've got our B that's going to show up. And then button num is going to come from right here. But every time that we generate a new button, add 1 to the button num. So now the next time this loop finishes running, it's going to come up here. It's going to generate out button 2. And it's going to go B, oh, what's button num? Button num is now 2. So the end result here is that when we click on a button in the console, we get the right number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if we click on any one of them, we should see that button number there. Stop there and pull. Well, that was quick. Okay, maybe I didn't need to stop there and pull. Whoever's lost, do you want to take a minute and see if I can get you caught up? Okay, I'm gonna keep going then.
Wait, Max, quick.
Yep.
All right, since I'm kind of following along, I just want to know. So, can you go back to the index? I think it was not the index, but on Google. Where were you just at?
Here.
So the way we we just set that up for the go. Okay. All right. Wait, never mind. I got it.
Okay. Okay. So we've done all of this work just to get knowing what button we click on here. So if I click on this button, I get button 3. Well, what we need to do is say, hey, the button ID that we got, that we clicked on is in event.target.id. We were console logging it out before. Now I'm just going to store it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if button ID is equal to button 1, what I would like to do is come up to this board, get into this spot right here and place an X. So how am I going to get access to that spot right there? I'm going to say board, and then how do I get to a specific element in an array? Yep, I'm going to say board 0. And I'm going to just console log that out because I don't know what that's going to get me. So I'm going to console log out board 0. I'm going to click on another button and nothing happens. Well, that's okay because we only said do this for button ID B1. Now, when I click on my B1, now I get this array, which is not this big array. It's just this one in here. So because it's another array, how do we get access to that spot right there?
That is, you gotta do squares, and then you gotta put the 2 numbers inside.
No comma.
Is
So 2 back-to-back squares. So now what we can do is we can say, hey, in 0, 0, you got to think about these as coordinates, right? This is going to be our row number, and this is going to be our column number. But in JavaScript, everything is 0 indexed. So when we are talking about the first row, that's going to be row 0. And when we're talking about the columns, that's going to be column 0, 1, and 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, go to 0, 0, and add in, make that equal to an X. And then after we're done updating our board, go update our HTML, which is going to come up here, run all of this code, and based off of the data that's in the board up here, it's going to make that reflect. So if I come down here and do my X, now my X shows up. And I just need to carry that down through here. I'm going to say else if my button ID is equal to button 2. Well, button 2 is still in the first row up here, but it's now in the second column. So it's still row 0, but it is column number 1. And if I save that and paste and test, now I've got my 2 working. And if I refresh, I clear the board and I can keep going there. So I'm going to say, okay, if the button is button 3, it's still in row 0, but it's now in column 2. And then I get even more fun if it is button 4. Well, where's button 4? Button 4 right here is going to be in row index 1 and column index 0. So I'm just going to keep going here and say it's now in row index 1 and column 0. So if I save that, come over, now when I click on it, I'm getting all of those buttons working.
Those 3 equals then?
Yeah, so the 3 equals is you're saying, hey, does the button ID compare the button ID to the thing that's on the right? And if the button ID happens to equal, it's the same thing, then make it equal to B2. So we don't use a single equal there because the single equal is an assignment, right? It's saying take whatever's on the right side and make it equal to what's on the left side. When we use our triple equal, we're saying, hey, compare these 2 together. And if we compare them together and what comes out is true, then execute the code in the curly braces. So we're going to rapid fire through this and say button 4, button 5, button 6, button 7, button 8, and button 9. And then we're going to say button 4 is in row 1, index 0 for the column. This is going to be in 1, this is going to be in 2, And then this is going to be 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 2. So I'm not wearing one right now. Okay, so in our buttons, if we click on any one of them, we should have our X appear, and we should be able to enter the whole board with X's. So I know that was a lot of copy and paste. We did all of that in the button clicked event. And then in there, we also made sure once we were done updating our board, we have the update HTML here. So really what I can do is I can, anytime we click on something, I can log out the whole board. And when I click on a couple of them, our board is really an array of 3 arrays. And if we go into that array and pop one open, we can see the data. We can see our 3 X's showing up just like they are in the interface, but it's just getting stored in our JavaScript array. And because it's in our JavaScript array, it's much easier to access all of this stuff with an index. Now, as we go here, it's gonna be easy to lose track of what index are we on? What button are we checking? So one thing that I did is in the outline, I took a screenshot of all of the indexes, right? So if we're trying to get access to this button, it is in the row index of 2, the column index of 0. The center button is 1, 1, and so on and so forth. So if you're getting lost on what button are we working on or what are we trying to check, come back to this screenshot and hopefully that gives you a little context in terms of what we're working on. So what the point we should be at right now is that you should be able to refresh to clear out your board and click on every button and have an X show up. And if you are able to do that, you've got everything up and running. Oh, we're getting to them. We are 52 lines of code in. We've got 322 to go. 322 total.
Max, I'm still with you. I got an error in my console, so I'm just trying to fix it real quick.
Cool. If you get stuck, let me know.
Okay.
I am gonna kick off another poll. I think everyone's following, but I just want to make sure. Very easy to lose you. Very easy to skip over one thing quickly and then lose everyone. So I just want to check in and make sure everyone's following along all right. Someone who has it working or someone who's just along for the ride, do you want to do a quick overview of like someone want to take a stab at like what our code is doing? What's the general code structure? You don't have to do a line by line, but what are the general objectives that we have covered so far?
I'll try and take a stab.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. And well, as you talk, I'll just highlight it on the screen.
Okay, hold on. Let's see. All right, are we gonna start from the top?
Yep.
All right, so the let board is us basically mapping out the actual board, giving the coordinates of how the board will basically lay out. So the parentheses is each board itself, right?
Well, the outer array is the board itself, which is the first square bracket. And then each column is represented by the individual quotes. And then the row is represented by the inner square brackets.
Okay, so you said the outer brackets is the column and then the inner.
The outer one is the board itself. That has all the rows and all the columns. These are representing each individual row. So the inner square brackets is each row. And then each thing inside of those rows is a column, and those happen to be empty quotes.
Okay, got you. It's weird. Like I know what it's doing, but I guess my words not matching up with it. But I got what it is. I'm sorry. Bye, Kanaya. And then Const update. I actually don't know why we put what was the parameter prim one?
Shouldn't be
I
there.
missed
We didn't
that.
use it.
Okay, I was confused too when I put that in. I'm like, what did we use that for? Oops. I messed myself up. Sorry, let me fix my code. Okay, I think I'm back on. All right, so we're back on that part. Updating the HTML, is that just us pulling it from our index HTML to give the actual board itself the idea of what we got going on the script?
Yeah, so what you can do is you can think of update HTML as basically the converter between this board here and what shows up in our HTML, right? Because our HTML isn't going to take this array very well. Our HTML has to be structured in a way that we started out with, right? With our containers and our rows and our buttons inside of it. So what we're doing here is we're kind of translating our board here into HTML. So we start out with a string just with our board, and that's going to hold all of our rows inside of it. Then we do our let button num because we need to know what button we're looping over. We need to know what button we're about to insert. Then we come in and we go, hey, go get every row out of the board. So now we've busted through this layer of the array, that layer of the onion, so to speak, and we get to this individual array. Well, we need to loop over each value in that array. So we come down here and we say, hey, add a div HTML row, a div class row. And then once we've got the row container set up, go through each column in that row. So go through each one of these empty strings. And every time we hit an empty string, we're going to add in or any string, we're going to hit a button. And that button is going to do our button click. Well, that button click matches up with our button click down here. Then we say, hey, add an ID to that button and use a template literal. Use these $ curly braces to actually put in the button number, put in whatever value is here. And then go in and inside that button, we either want the column, we want what's inside of this quote, or we want a space to show up. Then we close out the button itself, and every time that we add a new button, we add one to the button number. So we are keeping track and saying, hey, now we're going up to a new button. So this inner for loop right here is going to run 1, 2, 3 times because it's going over the first row, and then it says it's done. Then we go, hey, HTML, add a closing div. What's that closing div for? That's for the div class row, because we are done with that row. So now we come down to this curly brace, and it goes all the way back up to this for loop, and it says, hey, go back to the board. Now we're ready for the next row. Okay, what do you want to do for that row? We'll create a new div class row for it, then go into our for const col row, and now we're looping over this one here. And so that for loop runs another 3 times. And then it goes through it all again and gets this one right here. So our for loop here, this for loop and these 3 lines of code in particular, 4 lines of code, are going to run 9 times. And we can see the output of all of this, which we're sticking into the container, by going into our JavaScript and hitting right-click inspect. And now you see our div class row, and here are the outputs of our loop, where it's putting in the B1, B2, B3 because we've got the template literal going on right here.
Got you.
It's
funny, it's now making sense. So basically what we're doing on the JavaScript by lining it up with the HTML, with the HTML is basically like it's giving it the ability to do I guess that's the back end of the interface of it. We're basically giving it the ability to actually function.
Yep, it's exactly what we're doing. It's almost like this entire thing is called a function.
It was a light bulb moment. I'm sorry, y'all. Like, duh, y'all. But yeah. I'm sorry, it was a light bulb moment. Like I
No, that's good. And so the last part of all of this is, hey, what happens when a button gets clicked? And so what we do, and there's a lot of code to basically just say, hey, when a button is clicked, take in the event, and the event knows the target. The target is the button that we clicked on. Get the ID out of the button. Well, where's that ID coming from? That's coming from right here. So based off of that, we come down here and we say, hey, button ID, and we say, hey, if it's button 1, we know that that is in row 0. So that's going to be this whole array up here, and it's in column 0, which is going to be this string right here. So what we do is we put an X in there and then go through and do it for all of our buttons. So we're using the coordinate system here, console logging out the board, and then we update our HTML again. Well, why do we need to update our HTML again? It's because we updated the board. So based off of whatever data we just put into the arrays, we're now going to essentially convert our array using the arrays up here and convert it into JavaScript by looping over all of it.
So Max, is else if kind of like or? So like, or if I hit button, if I hit this, or if I hit that, then it's you should put an X here.
That is exactly what it's doing. It's saying if the button ID is button 1, do this and forget about everything else down here. Now, if it's not that, check to see if it's button 2. If it is button 2, do this and forget about all of the stuff down here. So what it's doing is it's saying, hey, check to see if this is true. If it is true, then we don't need to check any of the other else ifs because that first one is true. So if we get through and we find out that the button ID is 7, what we can do is we can just run this code in particular, and we don't have to worry about any of the stuff down here.
Okay, thank you.
Now, this code in particular would work fine if it were all if statements, because the button ID is never going to be B1 and B2, but it is more efficient for the computer to do them in chained else ifs, because as soon as it finds whatever button ID it's looking for, it's only going to run that code and not check for all of these down here. Okay, we do have 10 votes in. We are 11 minutes away from break. We are all right? We feeling good? Okay. So what I'm going to do is, what is the next logical step? We've got, you know what, I'm going to fix this one thing because it's going to bother me. You notice when we put in an X, the whole button shift over a little bit?
Yep.
Ready for this super hacky fix? Instead of putting in 1 non-breaking space character, we're putting in 2 non-breaking space characters. So when we save that and come over and we put in our X, there's still a little bit of a shift, but it is significantly less noticeable. No, they all go in the quotes, and the semicolon separates the 2 of them, or there should be 2 semicolons. Okay, so it is easy to be in our code and be so in our for loops and our variables and our arrays and all of that stuff. And then we get to this point and we're like, well, my X's are showing up, now what? So it's important to take a step back and think, okay, as a user, I have played tic-tac-toe before. I place my X and my X shows up. What happens next when you play tic-tac-toe?
The other person goes.
The other person goes, but we aren't playing another person, we are playing the computer.
Person.
Artificial intelligence, now it's a person. Okay, so what happens when we're playing tic-tac-toe against the computer?
Try to stop you from getting 3 in a row.
And that is going to be 330 lines of code, and it's very challenging to take on the first stat. So we are going to build this in 3 steps. The first step we're going to build is the computer's going to go in a random spot. Then before we go any further, we need to know, hey, did the player win or did the computer win? Because if either one of them won, we need to stop the game, say, you know, reset it and go back to where we're at. That is going to be the goal for where we get to tonight. I think that's going to be the line. However, what we're going to go into starting tomorrow is, okay, now the computer's going randomly. How do we make it smarter? Well, the computer has to be able to block you. And if it doesn't have to block you, then it's just going to pick a random spot to go. Then we check to see if anyone won. But that checking to see where the computer should go and if anyone has won is a lot of if statements. So we're going to start out with the computer going in a random spot. The computer's going in a random spot. What's the one thing we have to check for first before we can put it in that random spot? See if it's occupied. So what we're going to do is, after all of these buttons are clicked, what we are going to do is say, hey, computer, take your random turn. And just like that, we're done, and the computer knows exactly what to do. Just kidding. We need to tell it, hey, how does the computer take a random turn? So we're going to say const computer random turn is equal to this function, and it's an empty parenthesis because we don't have any parameters coming in, right? That function doesn't really need to know anything. It doesn't need anything past it. So what we need to do is figure out, hey, let's look at a random spot in this array. How would we say, look at a random spot in this array? We really need two things, right? We need the row and we need the column. So what we're going to do,
Oh,
go ahead, Nicole.
I was gonna say, is it gonna be something random, like a word and then random?
It is. We are going to use math.random. I know math is everyone's favorite, but I've got a trick up my sleeve. Believe it or not, JavaScript does not have a way to generate a random number between two things. The random function built into JavaScript is just going to give us a random number between 0 and 1, some decimal number. And that is a pain in the ass to work with. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Google and we're going to say random number between JavaScript. And we are going to click on this second Stack Overflow answer, which has 2,916 upvotes, and it has this lovely function called random int from interval. And it says min and max included. So basically, if we say 0 here and 2 here, it's going to give us either 0, 1, or 2 as a result. So what we're going to do, believe it or not, I'm actually telling you to copy and paste. We're going to copy this whole function, come in here and paste it. But we have a function in here, and we know that's the older syntax. So the reason why it's important to recognize that this is doing the same thing that this is because sometimes you find older code that has that function word in it. So we're going to modernize this code. We're going to say const, and random int from interval sounds really long to me. What I'm going to call that is random number between. And that is going to equal our min and our max incoming parameters and go into our curly braces. So now when we say computer, take a random turn, I can console log out a random number between 0 and 2. So what that's doing is when the computer random turn gets called down here, it's going to come up and it's going to say, hey, console log out random number between 0 and 2. It's going to take those as arguments, and those arguments are going to get passed into min and max up here. So min is going to be 0, max is going to be 2. Okay, now it's going to do stupid math stuff because this function is not built into JavaScript, and it's going to return that out. So I'm going to get 0, 1, or 2 coming out from there. Then I come down here, and this whole thing is going to be replaced with the 0, 1, or 2 that gets console logged back in. And that's going to console log out. So I'm going to go back to my code. I'm going to look at Tic Tac Toe. I'm going to click on something, and I should get 2 in my console, or some random number. Hopefully you all don't get 2 because then something's really broken. But if we click on another button, I get 1. Click on another button, I get 2 again. And now I got 0. So I just keep on getting a random number coming out. Now we're going to use that random number to check to see if it's empty and do a bunch of stuff down the road. But I think this is a good stopping point. So I'm going to kick off the poll here. We will say come back from break at 7:20 and we'll keep going from here. But vote in the poll before you go. Oh, one thing I forgot to say, whenever you copy and paste code, we shouldn't just copy and paste it and go on, because this is not code that we wrote. So it's like going back to like high school English classes, right? Where whenever you quoted someone or pulled in some statistic, you had to have the whole like citation page or the whole footnotes down at the bottom. We want to do something similar in our code, because we could come back to this code and read through all of this and be like, I know I'm not smart enough to write that. Where did that come from? And so all we want to do is in our Stack Overflow question, I'm just going to copy that Stack Overflow link, come back to my code and add in a comment, 2 slashes, and say source and paste in that whole link. And what that's doing, while it's not like stealing any code or anything, that just sets me up. So if I need to reference back what this code is doing, or know what the initial question was, or read the context on any of this, I'm able to just copy this link right back into my browser and read all of that. So important to add in your sources there, especially if it's code that you couldn't have come up with on your own.
Actually, we could have, because we did free code kit.
Oh, that is true. That is true.
That was one of the exercises.
Right now, my code is the board, update HTML, random number between, computer turn, and button clicked.
Underneath the button click at first.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Well, it can matter. In this situation, it doesn't matter.
Why would it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first things first, we've got to get our board set up. Board's got to be up at the top, because it's got to know when we call update HTML, what's it trying to loop over. But what the computer does is when it hits our script tag, this is really the entry point, right? This is the first time that it says, hey, we've got JavaScript, go run it. How our JavaScript executes is it takes the whole board and it goes, board is great, I got it in memory. Now it goes to update HTML and it goes, update HTML is a function. I'm going to store all of this so I know what to do when you tell me to update it, but I'm not running any of the code inside of here. All I'm doing is remembering that when you ask me to update the HTML, I know to do all of this stuff. So now it gets down here and it goes, I've got update HTML in memory and board in memory and nothing else. Now it comes down here and it goes random number between, same thing. Don't really care about any of this code until you tell me to generate a random number between. This theme continues for computer random term. Okay, I know that function exists. I know what to do when you tell me to do it. You haven't told me to do it yet. Same thing for button clicked. Hey, when the button is clicked, I know what to do, not doing any of that yet. Then it gets down all the way to the bottom, and this one last little line of code is what kicks this whole cycle off. Now it's saying update HTML. Okay, now you're telling me to run that code. So I need to come back up here and update the HTML. Well, this update HTML has to be able to go through the whole board. So if we took this whole board and stuck it down here, what you're going to get is a cannot access board before initialization. And what that's saying is, you told me to update the HTML. Before I run any of this code, I need to go run all of the code in this function. Well, I can't do that because I'm trying to look for board and board doesn't exist yet. So we do have to have board at the top. But what ends up happening is it gets through, it runs all of this code and it's like, I'm done. I'm officially over. I updated the HTML. There's nothing after that. I'm finished. But then what happens is we left this sneaky on click button clicked on here. So now when that on click actually happens, the browser says, oh, button clicked. You told me I have that in my memory. Button clicked is a function down here. Let me go execute all of this code. So it goes in and executes all of that. It updates the board, and then it goes, oh, you want me to do a computer random turn, huh? Well, in order to do that, I need to come up here and console log that out. Oh, console log it out. You want a random number between two things. Go execute this code. And now all of a sudden we have run every line of JavaScript. But all of this button click code never gets run until that on click happens. And once that on click happens, that's what kicks off the whole function. So order does matter, but this button clicked can be down at the bottom because even though we reference it up here, it doesn't actually get run until the button is actually clicked.
Right now, what should our code be doing?
It should be showing an X when you click on a button, and it should be anytime you click on a number, a button, you should get a random number between or a random number 0, 1, or 2 in your console.
Okay, so the computer's not going yet. All right,
Computer is not going yet.
got it.
Any final questions before we go on break?
Why is water wet?
Same reason the sky is blue. Okay, we're gonna take a break and see you guys at 7:25.
Got some.
What'd you say, Larry? Yeah, I can't hear you if you're speaking.
I was telling Doug I got the universal control working. So now I can use my MacBook Air to control my iPad. Because it wasn't working before.
Oh, okay. You got your monitors in person?
I can't hear you.
You got your monitor in person today?
Okay, now you're good. They should be able to hear you now, Larry.
Okay.
We did the random thing. That is, yeah, so it's 2 sections right now. No problem. Nah, I should do that. Oh, maybe we'll do, that's what we're gonna do, Project Big Chat. I definitely need that for React, and that's the whole, right, do it, build it first without any API stuff, then layer in the API, then rebuild it in React, then layer in the API, then build your own API, and then layer that in. And then layer in SQL statements, and then layer in SQL eyes. And that went over really well in cohort 2. Students really like the iterative thing.
So after round, you're gonna do the chat and do what?
We're gonna do build the chat app without an API, where it just sends back a random message. And then, given this API documentation, make the chat app actually work. And I'm gonna build out an API quickly. Wouldn't require me to be more than a day ahead, but you know, hey, here's this API documentation, and go through it that way.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Not that it does any of that stuff.
Well, chat app has to have timestamps for messages, so we'll touch on. I don't want to go like tons of conversion, but.
Right.
Oh, I forgot to close the recording. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Any questions pop up during the break? You reading the code? Anyone stuck? Anyone need help before we dive back in?
I just had, and I'm so sorry I missed it. I
Yep.
thought I had an emergency question too, but they found it was okay. The random number between, what does that do? I'm sorry.
The random number right here is surprisingly, JavaScript does not have a random number generator between 2 numbers. So when you call math.random in JavaScript, it gives you this long decimal number between 0 and 1. And so instead of writing all of this code out ourselves, we just went on Google and we did a search for a random number between JavaScript.
Okay.
And that brought us to the Stack Overflow link. And so we took their code, which was a function, and pasted it in, and then modernized it a little bit by using arrow function instead.
Okay.
And this is, is this one long enough? If not, I can grab the other one out of the. Yeah, no problem. This is basically taking a number between the min and the max and then giving us that number. So when we say give us a number between 0 and 2, it is going to give us a number 0, 1, or 2.
Okay.
And we are going to use that in the code that's about to come up to find a random spot for the computer to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Are we good remote? Whoever's remote, can you still hear us?
Did you have to turn that thing back?
Yes.
Or-
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Just want to make sure we don't forget about you. I know what it's like to be remote, trust me. Okay. Random number between. So we've got, this is where we left off, right? We were trying to make the computer take a random turn, but in order for
Your
it
screen
to
is not being shared.
Thank you. That's why I ask.
You're welcome.
There we go. Share. That's not fun. Okay, so we were trying to get the computer to take a random turn, right? Because we figured out when we click the X button, now the computer is supposed to go somewhere. But we're trying to tell it too much, right? When we say, hey, computer, go take your turn, that is a perfectly fine sentence in English, a very hard thing to program out. So we have to break it down into steps. And that's how we kind of pseudocode, right? When we pseudocode, we're saying, let's just write this out in a way that the computer can understand it. So when the computer takes its turn, what it needs to do is it needs to not only pick a random row, but it needs to pick a random column as well. Then it needs to see if something is in that column or not. And if it is, it has to pick another random spot to go. And if it isn't, it needs to place the O inside of it. And after all of that, it's got to update the HTML again to show that that O is in our array. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, pick what we need to store is a random row index and a random column index. And we're not going to set them to anything to get started. And what we're going to do is use a do while loop. So this is just like a while loop. The only difference is the do says, hey, this is going to run at least once. And after it runs, check to see if this while condition is still true. And if that while condition is still true, then do that thing again. Otherwise, you're done and you don't need to rerun the loop. So we are going to say do, and we're going to say let random row equal a random number between 0 and 2. And let our random column also equal a random number between 0 and 2. And then check to see if in our board, the random row and the random column have anything in that. And if they don't, we're going to use that exclamation mark to say the opposite. Check to see if the board does not have anything in this random row and the random column. And if it doesn't have anything in it, we found our random row index is going to equal a random row, and our random column index is going to equal a random column.
Jay, 1 second.
5 seconds, 10 seconds.
I'm just gonna do the while loop so we can see the output, and then I will explain all of it. So what we want to do is we want to say, hey, run this code while we still do not have a random row index. And once we've done all of that code, console log out the random row, the random row index and the random row column. Random column index. So we're going to come over here, and when I click something, I'm going to have 2 come out. Remember, 2 is here because we're 0 index, and that is something that is empty. So now I'm going to come in, I'm going to click another one, and I get 1. Well, that one is also empty. And if I come in here and click on a lot of them and clear out my console, when I click on this last one, it gets to 2, 1. How did it get to 2, 1? It kept on trying to find a random number until it found one that was empty. And the way we can prove that is we can actually console log out our random row and our random column. And so when we're in here and we click on one, random row and random column, when we, come on. When we click on one of these, we're going to see this loop runs a couple times until it finds one that's valid. And that's especially true when we get towards the end. This loop is going to keep running until it stumbles on the right random one that's empty, and then it's going to set that in. Word of warning, do not click on that last button because this loop will run infinitely if there is no random spot available for it to go on. We're going to fix that in a second. So if you get to this point, do not click on this button, or if you do, just close the tab in Chrome because your computer is going to go nuts. So let's take a step back and read through this code. What we did is we said, hey, let these two things exist. We're not setting them to anything yet. What we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we're trying to find a random row index and a random column index. And we are setting those up, and we're going to fill them once we know that they're empty. Then we come into our do loop, our do while loop. And the only difference between a do while loop and a while loop is the do loop is guaranteed to run at least once. So what we do is we say, hey, go generate a random number between 0 and 2 and store that in our random row. Then go generate another random number between 0 and 2 and store that in our random column. Then go into an if statement. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our board. We know our board is up here. We know and love it. Then we come down and we check the random row and the random column that we just generated from up here. Okay, now check to see if there is something not in it. That little exclamation point is flipping it. It's saying if that is not a value, if that is an empty string, then we have found the random empty spot that we want. So take the random row from right here and store it in this random row index that we had set up here. Then take the random column and store that in the random column index. Okay, now whether or not this is true or not, we come out to the end of this loop. The end of this loop says while what? When would you like this loop to keep running? We want to keep running this loop while we have not found a random row index. So if this if statement is not true, if it picked a random number and there's already an X or an O in it, we can't use it. So it's going to hit this while loop and it's going to say, well, random row index never got set because this if statement is not true. So because it's not true, we're going to take this random row and we're going to do this whole loop again. And we're going to generate another random number between 0 and 2 and keep going until we find a random number coordinate that is not taken in the array. And as soon as we do that, that's when we know we have found our random row index and our random col index that are empty. And you're probably looking at all of this and going, what's the difference between random row index and random row? Well, what we're doing is these are truly random, but we're only setting the random row index when we know that those two numbers that we're looking at are actually empty. So I would argue that this is really bad code because you can't look at random row index and know the difference between this and random column. So this is when we want to go back and we want to refactor some of our code. So if you want to hold on following along here, because I'll have the final version in a second.
Before you do that,
yep.
You see how it said rate? Can you explain line 40 again? Because like you got it between those brackets.
Yep. So what this? Yeah. So this, the code between the curly braces is what's going to run in a loop.
But then, okay.
And that loop is going to keep running while the random row index does not exist. So that exclamation point is saying not. And then we're saying, while we don't have a random row index, keep doing this code up here. So let's refactor this a little bit to be cleaner. What we're trying to get here is this is truly a random number and this is truly a random number. So I think those are properly named. I don't think random row index is properly named because what we're really aiming for in those is a random, there's an empty row index and an empty row column. Because these random numbers only get set into these values if the board does not have something in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to rename these. Instead of saying random row index, we're going to say empty row index and make sure we're consistent with every place we use that. And then we're going to say empty col index and use that here and here.
Is there like a place, a shortcut to just refactor a particular variable you're changing?
Yeah, if you double click on one of them and hold in command, nope. If you double click on them and hit command D, you can just type in the new name of the variable and you'll see it updates it everywhere it's being used.
Thank you.
Highlight the word and hit command D, and then you just start typing and it will update it everywhere. Okay, so D for like duplicate, as in find all the places this is duplicated and then replace it with something.
Okay.
Yeah, before you continue, right?
Yep.
So, before you, that console.log and you had random number between 0 and 2. But that's pretty much the same thing as you got up there, right? So let random row equals random number between.
Yeah, so the only reason you're asking about what I had here.
Yeah. So underneath that, or before that, underneath, wow, the
Here.
44, what then you have random number between before that?
No. So I think we can factor this even more because the only difference between a do loop, a do while loop, and a while loop is the do while is guaranteed to run at least once, right? So no matter what is in this while, it is guaranteed that this do is going to happen at least once. But our while statement is already true. When we first come into this code, because we don't have an empty index, that while is going to run no matter what. So what we can do is we can actually just take this whole while and replace the do with the while loop. And now all of a sudden that code is easier to beat. Hey, have an empty row index and an empty column index. While we have not found an empty row index, go into this loop and generate out a random row and a random column, which is a number between 0 and 2. Then check the board, and going into the board, take the random row and the random column and see if it does not exist. If it does not exist, then take the random row and say, hey, we found an empty row index, and take the random col and store it into the empty column index. Now, if this code has run, it gets to the end of this curly brace, it goes back up to our while loop and says, hey, do we not have an empty row index yet? Well, if we did find one that's empty, this code is not going to run again. But if we have not found one that's empty, it's going to generate another random number, check to see if it's in the board, and if it's not, it's going to go rerun this whole thing. Or if it's empty, it's not going to rerun the whole thing. If it is empty, we found our empty one, we can stop running the loop. So I think this is thoroughly refactored. I'm going to just stop here because I know that was a lot, and poll. Oh, no, not that poll. Launch poll. And I'm going to move this to over here. I'm going to put this up and I'll leave it there. If anyone has questions or is stuck, let me know.
Why is it that for the while part, when we say it is not empty, it's only the empty row index and not the empty column index?
Because there's no way that empty row index would be set and empty column index would not be set, because we set both of them right here. So we could say while there is a empty row, while there's not an empty row index, or there's not an empty column index, and that would run exactly the same way. But we don't really need this here because when we set row index, we also set the empty column index. So there's no way this empty row index could be set and empty column index not be set.
Right, because if you're checking the row, it's trying to check the column.
Exactly.
Okay.
So this is completely valid, but we just don't have to do that second check because there's no way we wouldn't have an empty column and not have an empty row.
Okay. Would it work the same way? Would you be, because you.
Yep, you could. I know what you're asking. You could do that and that would work fine.
Oh, geez.
I saw that do while and I thought about my professor OCC. He said if we use a do while, we get an F. I'm like, it's a part of the language. So I never used the do while.
So I will say do whiles are fine with me. If I ever see a switch statement, you get an F off for the day in careers and code.
Oh, geez.
I hate switch statements. I think if statements are so much easier to read. And when do you ever have a switch statement that you forget to put in a break and then all of a sudden it's running more code than you want? It is part of the language. I should really probably teach it, but I cannot stand switch statements. There's a free code camp exercise for switch, right?
I want to say yes.
I think there's one quick one and you have to use the break at the end of the switch, but I cannot stand. It's the only part of JavaScript that I hate.
Okay, but I've watched, I don't know, different YouTube videos or just videos in general, even on Udemy or wherever, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody use switch,
Hate them.
unless maybe it's the dirty word language.
Mm-hmm.
What's a dirty word like? Fizzbuzz.
TypeScript.
Oh, no, that's not what I was gonna say there.
Oh.
Python.
The A one.
Oh, Angular. Okay, Paul, sorry, I'm asleep at the wheel here. Eight people have voted, so we'll give you guys 1 more minute to catch up.
Matt,
Yes.
how did you do that thing again where, you just explained it earlier, where you highlight
Yep.
part of the word, finds it and replaces it with everything?
Double click on the word and then hit Command D. And you see this like little thing that pops up temporarily in the top right. That means you're in replacement mode. So if you just start typing over the word that you have highlighted, it's going to replace all instances of that word with the new word that you're typing in.
Question.
Yep.
You have to keep pressing Command D to select them all because.
No, if you just double click on the first one and hit Command D once and let go, now when you type the new, oh, maybe you do. Command D, oh yeah, you do have to keep hitting Command D to get all 4 of them. And then once you have them, you can do your new variable name and it will type them in everywhere. Good catch. Sorry, I missed that step.
But prettier just do the color.
Prettier doesn't do anything with color. It only does the tabs and spaces.
Oh, like, the
Okay, so prettier is what they call an opinionated formatter. There are formatters that are unopinionated. In other words, you can configure them to like, oh, I want, this certain line width, or I want, but prettier in particular is like, no, you have it, it's like the soup Nazi. You have it our way, you get no modifications, you take tabs the way you, so some people can't stand prettier and keep prettier turned off, and that's okay. But as long as you are staying on top of your indentation, I coded for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years without prettier, and I did all of my own indentation. And because of that, I learned, hey, this is running in the for loop. It's indented a certain level. It's much easier to read the code. I did all of that on my own. Then I started using prettier, and I'm like, don't like it. It's moving things around on me. And then I finally got over the hump, and now I can't code without it. So.
You have prettier on?
Yep. Yep, if I move this over and hit save, it puts back for me.
So the way that you do it is highlight it, F2, and then type the thing and it will change all of them.
Oh, so instead of hitting Command D a bunch of times, you can just hit F2 and it will do all of them.
Yep.
Although you may have to do a function F2
Yeah.
if your keyboard is set up for the keys. Okay, we've got 10 votes in. Last chance for questions before we move on here. And I hate all four of them.
I just like.
Okay, so we did all of this work just to find our empty row index and our empty column index. So now that we've done all of that work, what do we want to do with those empty indexes?
We want to put an O.
We do. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, go to the board, and in our board, we want to use the empty row index and the empty column index and put an O in there. And then we need to go back down to where our computer random turn is getting called, which is all the way down here. And we already have an update HTML in there. So we're going to save. We're going to come over here and look at our tic-tac-toe. And when we make a move, we get an O, not an O, no.
My boxes are disappearing.
All right, we'll solve that in a second. But don't fill your board because we do have a chance for an infinite loop here. We're going to fix that in a second. But if you keep clicking, you should see the computer is making random moves for you. Just don't click on that last box. And if you do, close the tab and reopen it because it will loop. Zach, you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, you highlight the word, you hit Command D.
F2 will select them all. F2 will select them all.
Okay, so go to your computer random move. And you are look at the syntax that we use in the button clicked to use the indexes. And you see how we've got the double square brackets, and then compare that to line 42. I'm sorry, 41.
Not sure why I did that. Thank you.
No problem. Oh, you know what? I think Prettier screwing you up. It's trying to put them in because you've got a comma in there that shouldn't be there. That should actually be a closing and then an opening. And now, there you go. Okay. Anyone else need a break or need have a question before we move on? What we should have going on here now is that when we clear out everything and we click on any button, we have the computer make a random turn for us.
Add some suspense to it.
We actually are going to add a little drama tomorrow. Okay, so let's keep going here. Before the computer makes a random turn, what do we need to do?
Check to see if we won the game.
You're
We
not
do.
sharing your screen anymore.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so what we need to do is we need to check to see, hey, if I've got, see if the computer's going to let me win. If I've got 3 in a row here, I don't want the computer to keep going. I want it to congratulate me that I just won. So what we need to do is we need to check to see if there are 3 X's across or 3 X's down, or 3x is diagonal in either direction. So what we are going to do is we're going to do this the hard way first and then see the easy way tomorrow. So what we are going, well, the less lines of code, but harder to wrap your head around way tomorrow. Let me put it like that. So what we're going to do is before the computer takes, yeah. You have a question, Wayne? Or are you good?
Yeah, well, let me share my screen. I don't know what happened. Like,
Yeah, go for it.
weird. Everything is in here. Am I sharing?
You're still not, no.
Oh, crap. Everything is in here.
So go to your browser and let's check in the browser first.
It's just,
I copied all that code.
okay. No, it's
So when
showing.
you, oh, okay.
Nope.
Okay, so open your console. Oh, nope. Go back to Chrome. Your console's in the inspect tab.
Yes. Huh.
So right click on the white area.
Weird in
So
me out.
right click there.
It's not doing it.
Maybe close out that other tab. The one that's still loading. I don't know if that's causing problems. Okay, now try and right click. Oh, you might have something in an infinite loop. Go back to your JavaScript. Scroll up for me to the while loop. Yeah, you are taking your random row and storing it in an empty col index.
Random row.
It's
And then,
supposed to be a row.
Yep. So you triggered an infinite loop, and that's why everything got wonky.
oh,
So if you save that, you may want to stop your live server and restart it just so it's not still trying to refresh. So stop your server down here. And then restart it. And now click on you still have an infinite loop? While, yeah, you still have an infinite loop. All right, go back to your code. Maybe that wasn't the problem. Random row, while there's not empty row index, empty col index, while if
that, I don't know if it matters, but that T in turn might need to be capitalized. The constant computer random turn.
Scroll down, Wayne, to the bottom of your button click. No, you're consistent there.
The other one.
Well, he's got it lowercase there where he calls it. So because it's lowercase in both places, it's not causing a problem.
That way, let me stay out of your business.
It's good practice.
what?
I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. Go back to your browser. Yeah, it's just not loading. Okay, let's try this point. Go back to your code and comment out the entire while loop. save, and then see if that loads for you. Exit pages, and then restart the live server, or just hit the refresh button. Either should be fine. Oh no, something's. You've got something broken, and it's not in your while loop.
Yikes.
He can't even open his console because it's not loading the page. Scroll up a little bit. Let me just see if I see something obvious.
So if he comments out the JavaScript, then the HTML page will load.
Yeah, it's a good check. Go to index.html, Wayne, and comment out line 28. So just put your cursor there and hit Command/. You don't have to. Yeah, that's fine. And just Command/. Oh,
That works.
Command/. There you go. Save. And see if your page loads. What the heck?
Put H1 in it.
Maybe open a new window.
Put an H1.
Well, no, because the div container and yeah, it's all on there.
Maybe open a new window.
Okay, now that's working. So go back and put your script back in. And save. And see if it still loads.
I see that canvas.
It does. Okay, so click button. Okay, and now that's working. So go back to your code and go to script and then comment that whole while loop back in. And save. There you go.
That was weird. Okay.
Matt telling me missing the double NBS.
Yeah. If you Wayne, go back to your update.html method and look for the NB in script.js. There's a function called update HTML. And higher up. Keep going, keep going. On line number 14, you have that quote NBSP semicolon. If you copy what's inside of the quotes and paste it again, so there are two of them, it will get your alignment right.
This one?
Yep, including the semicolon, but not the quotes. There you go. Just copy that and then add another one. And then when you click the buttons, it won't jump around as much.
Inside the quote.
Inside the quote. And then save. And then now when you click on a button, it won't jump around.
Oh.
And the only thing there is you're using a cap. You have to be careful on your capital X's and your capital O's. So I'm using all lowercase X's and all lowercase O's.
You can check.
So just check where you make the computer do a random turn. It looks like you've got a 0 or a capital O in there, and I'm just using a lowercase o on line 43. There you go. Question, Chrissy?
Yeah. I probably should share my screen.
Sure. Let me stop. You're all set, Wayne?
See, down to
Again?
the left button.
Yep.
Who does? Oh, when you refresh, did you get out of that loop?
No.
Okay, so you cannot click on the last button because the computer is infinitely going to try and find a place for it to go, and it can't do that. So you're gonna have to stop your live server, close out of any tabs that you have open, and reopen them. And that's probably how you got there in the first place. I did say that warning, I will say it again. Do not fill the last spot, because if you fill the last spot when you're clicking all the buttons, the computer's trying to take a turn, and it's infinitely trying to find a spot to go and cannot find a spot to put the O. So we're gonna fix that in a second, but don't do that yet.
And Max,
Yeah,
I would add to that, don't click on one you've already, like, don't click on an X you already put there. Because I discovered if you click on one you already did, the O will take a turn.
yes. Good warnings. We are gonna fix both of those, but we have to work our way up to that.
Yeah, mine just did the same thing, and I only did three clicks. And I'm on the unresponsive now too.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen. Let's take a look, because you should only have that looping going on if you fill the whole board or you click on a spot that already is taken.
Okay, well, Chris, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead, Chrissy.
So I just, is that my screen? Am I sharing? Oh, okay.
Yep, you're good. You're
So
moving.
right here, you see where it says column, line 18 and line 20. So on line 18, I copied what you had. I mean, literally typed it out.
Yep, so the problem is not there. Look at when colors start bleeding together and shouldn't be.
Right here, right?
Nope, it's actually gonna be on 15.
Oh,
Nope, that one's actually okay. Look at the symbol that you used on 13 to start that, and then the symbol that you used on 15 to end it. The
up under escape.
you did to start it. What did you use to end it?
Something now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now you've got another problem on 26, where you've got a const.
R equal, what is that?
I have no idea. You want to delete the R equals. And then you need an equal arrow, the arrow function on 26 between your closing parenthesis and the start of your curly brace. That equals fine. It's that one right there that you need your, yep. And then last one on 31 is, oh, you've got a const equals random number between equals. That equal on, yep. And then on 26, you've got an equal in there that shouldn't be there.
This one.
Nope, first one. There you
Oh my God. My whole thing was orange. I'm like, prettier failed me. Okay, all right. Let's go. Somebody else go.
Anyone else need to go? Sure.
Oh my God. Like I scrambled to get all that code in there, and then it messed up.
I was stuck for a little while, but I was so focused.
Right, they tell you the lines, but then, so I don't have my glasses, but that's why I can't tell that I don't have to write,
After 3, it didn't do it anymore, so I'll stay at 3.
Sharnjay, you need help?
Yeah. That's contagious.
so contagious.
Well, here's the thing here, Max. I still have my all that other stuff on the bottom. I think I need to move it up. It's messing me up.
Oh, here's your problem. You've got that line, that 73, that closing curly brace should be on 62.
Have one up there.
Oh, no, sorry, 51. You've got a semicolon. That's really screwing everything up.
Here.
Yep.
Oh, and there. Is that spaces?
Save. And then that one is that one. That one is that one.
This is what my-
You've definitely got a problem where hold on. Jesus, take the wheel here. Okay. That one is closing your while loop up here. And I don't think it's supposed to. So this if one is closing here. So let's move that one to where it's supposed to be and these two in. And now we can see this while loop is actually supposed to end here. And now that is closing that one off. This one closes that one off. And then this, I think, is a stray one. Let's see, if I click on that, oh, that goes to button clicked. Button clicked is supposed to end here. So now that's a stray one. And now we want to say, hey, when do we want the computer to take a random turn, console log, and update HTML? That's all supposed to happen after the button is clicked. And now your prettier is running again and your indentation looks right.
All right, one more thing before you get out of there. Can you, we were trying to fix my indentation. I don't want that red crap up there.
Okay, so that is coming from an extension you have installed, and it's called Indent Rainbow. So I'm gonna.
But that red stuff throws me off, so I don't know about that.
You may be able to go to the settings and the extension settings and play around.
Indent, and I think maybe you can know which one it'll be.
I don't use this.
I don't either.
You
Literally, I had it for one day. I couldn't do it.
I'm just gonna disable it for right now. There are settings in here that you can, like, these RGBA are color values. So like you could play around with that and figure out how to get it to not be red, but I'm just gonna disable it for now, and then you can always re-enable it down the road. So if I just do the reload required, now you're back to it not coloring things.
Like, making me think everything was wrong.
I think there like a plugin. So you know how when we go live,
Yep.
it's not like a plugin where you can go live, but it's like just on the side of the VS Code screen, and it doesn't go into like a separate browser.
I am not familiar, but that totally sounds like a great extension, so I'm sure it probably exists.
The preview.
Is that what
It's
it
a
is?
preview of your code. I saw it. I don't know how to enable it, but I saw it on like a YouTube video.
Like that, but I've never used it either, and I got rid of it.
Let me put my Googling hat on.
I just wanted to announce that it's 18 and I'm officially caught from the start of class. I did a whole update.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, now I lost Zoom.
It might be preview.
Okay, we're almost at the finish line. All I want to do is check for a victory, and then we will call it a day.
Shift X.
So what I'm going to do is I've got the computer taking the random turn. Everything is working fine. But what we want to do is we want to say, hey, before the computer takes a random turn, call this new function that we're about to create called, we're going to say const game status, a game winner actually, is going to check the game status. So I'm going to now come back up to before my button clicked and define a new const called check game status. And what we need to do is we need to check to see if X has won. Well, there are a lot of different ways X can win. X can win if you go to the board and in the first row and in the first column, there is an X. And also check to see in the board, if in the first row and the second column, if there is an X. And also check to see in the board, in the first row and in the second column, that there is an X. And if all of those are true, then return that X is our winner.
Do that for each row, the diagonals and the column.
Oh yeah, way ahead of me, Shantina. So we're gonna paste that all over again. And we're gonna say, hey, we're not only gonna check the first row, we're gonna check the second row. And we're also going to check the third row. But I'm already getting lost in these of which one am I checking here? Because if I mess up any one of these indexes, I'm screwed. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, check first row. Check second row. Check third row. Then I'm going to do all of that again. And I want to make sure I'm using my else ifs everywhere, because as soon as we find a winner, it doesn't matter, return it out. We don't need to keep checking for another one. Now we need to check for the columns. So we're going to say 0, 0. That's, again, if you go back to our outline, we've got all of these indexes here. So you can get a visual of what indexes are we working with. So for the first column, we need to check 0, 0. We need to check 1, 0. And we need to check 2, 0. And after we do all of that, this is checking the first column. We're then going to take that, make sure it's an else if, copy that and paste that 2 more times and say, hey, instead of checking the first column, we need to check the second and third columns. And then I need to look at my visual in order to be able to do that, because I did this without a visual earlier today and deeply regretted my life decisions.
Where did you just do all that? Like, where did you?
This is, I created a new function called check game status.
I saw that, but where and why did you put it in there?
I put it out with all of our other functions
Oh.
because we're going to need to check game status in a couple different places. So our second column is going to be 0, 1, 1, 1, and 2, 1. And then our third column is going to be 0, 2, 1, 2, and 2, 2. So now what we do is once we've got all of that working, I promise I'm almost at a stopping point, we're going to say, hey, check to see if there is a game winner. And if there is a game winner, then alert a template literal with the game winner has won. Then go to our board and clear that sucker out. Larry, you're a smarter man than I am. You could just scroll up and copy this whole thing, and that's completely fine too. Okay. If there is not a game winner, else make the computer take a random turn.
My brain is going to explode.
Butter and jelly sandwich.
Okay. That's it. We're stopping here for the night. Don't worry. We're gonna come in here. We still have work to do. Obviously, tomorrow's a new day, but tic-tac-toe at this point, if you find a way to win, you should get X as 1. There are still ways to hit infinite loops here, but if I go and I play any row and the computer does not block me, like in this case, they did, so I need to keep playing until I get 3 in a row, and then I should get my X as 1.
So right now, the computer is just randomly doing it. It's not doing strategy yet. That's
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. And then.
And if you're clicking at last X, it doesn't mean anything?
Correct. Yeah. As soon as you win, it doesn't actually put that X in. We'll fix that tomorrow. But it does tell you you won. And as soon as you hit OK, it clears everything out.
And if just from my brain, why did we put the check game status before the button click? Because, well, either one would work. It doesn't matter. Okay. Okay. Because in my mind, it would have gone.
Yep, that's fine. We can move it.
Okay. No, I'm gonna leave it like this.
Okay. To me, the button clicked is like the brains of the whole program, right? Like that's what's keep on getting run. That's what's calling out all the other functions. So I put that at the bottom because I'm like, this is the code that's running over and over and over again, right? So put all of the code that it is calling above it. So that way, when we call a function, it doesn't say function is not defined. Now, it doesn't really matter because that button click doesn't run until the event happens. And that event isn't going to happen until all the other functions have been loaded into memory. So we could put it down below and it wouldn't be a problem because it's not actually trying to execute the computer turn function until the event happens in the first place. So whatever order there is okay. But in my mind, I think, hey, if that function is the master one that's calling all the other functions, we should put that at the bottom and have all the functions that it's calling above it, just in case for some reason, if that runs, it's got all of the functions defined.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
But I've been programming for so long that things that make sense to me don't make sense to anyone else. So. Okay, that is it for the night. If you have survived this far, congratulations, you can get out of here. If you have not survived this long, I am definitely sticking around for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good one.
Doug, I got universal control working.
Yeah, I saw that. When I'm in person next, you got to show me.
I just tried. I think it might have been signing out of my iCloud account and signing back in. That might have worked. I didn't do anything special.
Oh, before everyone goes, I'm checking Slack to see if we're going to be, I'm going to give everyone a chance in Slack in CIC student C3. If you would like to change your vote based off of how class went tonight, you are welcome to. I'm trying to find.
Zach is bringing pizza. We're coming every day.
Only 2 people, nobody ate the pizza.
Oh, I'm going in for a slice.
I thought I'm taking a.
We have 8 people saying stay fully virtual and 7 people say do it in person.
Buy my vote.
What?
Wants to buy my vote.
So let's do this. Let's do the next 2 days optional in person. If you prefer to do remote, that's fine. We'll do those 2 days in person. Next week will be fully remote because Ryan isn't in Syracuse, at least not at this moment. And then we can revisit the option. Ryan is teaching Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. Monday we are off. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Monday next week will be fully virtual. And then we'll decide on Monday if we want to be back in person or stay remote.
Right, because technically it's looking at the calendar, next week would have been a remote week anyway.
Correct.
Okay, well,
So tomorrow and Thursday, I will be here in person. It's up to you if you want to be remote or not. Monday, we are off. There's no class on Monday. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the following Monday, Ryan is teaching fully virtually. So not next Monday, but the following Monday, we will decide if we want to go back to in person.
And I knew that.
Yep. I'm going to end the Zoom meeting unless anyone remote needs help. Okay.
I do a question.
Okay, I'm